All right, so welcome everyone to our flagship research colloquium series. And it is my distinguished pleasure to introduce my dear colleague and friend, Fadel Adib. Fadel is an associate professor in MIT Media Lab, as well as Department of EECS. He is also founding director of the Signal Kinetics Group, where he invents wireless and sensor technologies for networking, health monitoring, robotics, and ocean IoT. He is also the founder and CEO of Cartesian Systems, a spin-off from his lab that does indoor mapping indoor environments using wireless signals. Adib has won numerous accolades, such as TR35 as well as Forbes 30 under 30. His research on X-ray vision was recognized as one of the 50 ways MIT has transformed computer science. Adib Fadel has also won numerous awards such as NSF Career Award, ONR Young Investigator Award, ONR Early Career Grant, as well as Google Research Award and Sloan Research Fellowship. He is also known in our wireless community as the SIG Mobile Rockstar. He received his doctoral thesis from MIT, and he also won the MIT Best Thesis Award as well as the SIG Mobile Best Thesis Award. I will also like to share two interesting things about him that are not on his bio. First is his research was also shown on the popular sitcom The Big Bang Theory, where in one of the episodes where they use Wi-Fi signals to detect human emotions. And he can also do perfect cartwheels. And without further ado, I'll pass on the mic to Fadel to take us on a deep dive underwater. Over to you, Fadel.
Thank you very much, actually, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Can you hear me well? Great. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here with you today to share with you the research that my group and I have been working on decoding hidden worlds using wireless and sensor technologies. The research that we do in my group is driven by our own human desires. As humans, we crave to explore hidden worlds. And this curiosity has driven us to explore our seas, our oceans, go even beyond our planet and explore outer space. We're also curious to explore the hidden world inside our own bodies, to learn about our own selves and what is going on inside us. And yet, despite that, we know so little. Let us take the oceans. As late as this year, NOAA scientists estimate that we have never observed more than 95% of the ocean. 95%. Even if you take the human body, at every point in time, I know so little about what is going on inside my body. For example, did I catch a virus? Am I getting sick? Am I recovering? And it's not easy to get that information right away. And even when we try to build machines that allow us to explore the world and interact with it in new ways, much of the world remains hidden from them. For example, when we want to build machines, robots that perceive the world, we want to make them see things like us humans. But what if we could make them see things that are invisible to the human eye? These are the types of questions that motivate my group and I to think about how we can invent wireless and sensor technologies to decode hidden worlds. And today in this talk, I'm going to be telling you about these, focusing on the three areas that I talked about, which are the oceans, the human body, and robotics. And after I tell you about our technologies, I'm going to also share with you how we work with our collaborators in order for us to deploy these technologies to achieve societal, industrial, and ecological impact. So, for example, I'll be sharing with you how we work with oceanographers to deploy our sensors in the oceans, with medical doctors for our healthcare research, and how we sometimes ourselves spin off startups from the research in the lab to translate them into the real world. So let me start by telling you about our research on the ocean. Remember what I said that as of this year, more than 95% of the ocean has never been observed or explored. What this means is that we know more about the far side of the moon and the depth of the ocean, the far side of the moon and the surface of Mars than we know about the depth of the ocean. So a few years ago, my group and I started thinking, how can we build an Internet of Things for the underwater world? Now, you might be wondering, why do I want to build an IoT for the underwater world? Well, there's enormous scientific applications. One of the main applications is in climate change monitoring. If you can build an underwater IoT, you can deploy sensors and have them collect temperature and pressure measurements. I don't know if someone, maybe can you take the lights? Because I don't think people can see the slides well. Oh, not this much. I know it's not a movie, but we're getting there. So one of the main applications is being able to deploy sensors that allow us to monitor climate change. For example, sensors that can monitor underwater temperature and pressure and send us information so that we can build more accurate climate models, or even understand the impact of climate change on marine ecosystems. And underwater IoT can also help us discover new species. Scientists estimate that 9 out of 10 marine organisms have not been discovered yet. So if you can build underwater sensors, then you can use them to image or collect images or sounds of animals, send this data back to us to help in scientific discovery. There is also enormous value in an underwater IoT in food security. The United Nations has classified aquaculture, which is seafood farming, as the world's fastest growing food sector. 1 in 3 people in the world rely on the ocean as their primary source of protein. So an underwater IoT can be deployed in these aquaculture or seafood farming farms and be used to monitor them. For example, they could be used to detect early diseases or monitor, for example, harmful algae blooms. And with that, they can help us optimize growth and feed the world's growing population. And there's many other applications for ocean IoT, from defense to disaster response to weather prediction, mining, and so on and so forth. So we can enable all of these applications if we can build an ocean IoT. Unfortunately, less than 1 in a million of the Internet of Things is underwater, even though oceans cover more than 70% of our planet. So a few years ago, my group and I started thinking, OK, how can we build an Internet of Things for underwater? Can we take sensors, deploy them in the ocean, and have them monitor the underwater world for us? And as we started to do that, we faced a problem. And the problem was that the battery life of underwater sensors is extremely limited. As we dug deeper into the problem, we realized that the reason for this is because low-power sensors that use the lowest power modems need few watts of power in order for them to communicate their data, and they cannot be recharged easily. So for example, if my phone runs out of a battery, I can go and charge it at the end of the day. But if an ocean sensor runs out of a battery, I have to send a ship, pay $50,000 to $70,000 a day just to replace its battery and come back. And so it's not feasible to have these sensors that last for a long time, which is why state-of-the-art sensors for underwater monitoring can only last for a few hours or days if you want to use them for continuous monitoring, after which their batteries die. And so to address this problem and to be able to build underwater sensors that could monitor the environment for a long time, we came up with a technology which is called underwater backscatter networking. This technology consumes net zero power, which allows our sensors to last for a very long period of time without requiring any batteries. So let me describe to you how our technology works by comparing it to how traditional underwater communication systems work. In these underwater environments, you have, for example, you can imagine that you usually have an underwater drone and a bunch of underwater sensors. For simplicity, we'll just focus on one sensor. And instead of the underwater drone, you can imagine that you have a ship or even an access point that is near the shore. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, you cannot use Wi-Fi or Bluetooth underwater because their signals do not work well. Radio signals die exponentially fast in water. Instead, what you have to use is sound. And so our temperature sensor will have a speaker. Our underwater drone will have a hydrophone. And if you want to communicate data, you're going to send this data using sound. The problem with this approach is that generating and transmitting sound requires a lot of energy, which is what drains the sensor's battery. Now, in contrast, in our technology, both the speaker and the hydrophone are at the underwater drone. And instead, our sensor simply has an acoustic reflector. So now, when you transmit sound, it will reflect off this acoustic reflector and come back to the hydrophone receiver. And now with this approach, I can turn my acoustic reflector between reflective and non-reflective states. And once I can switch it between two states, I can communicate 0 and 1. I can send any message that I want in binary. And that allows me to communicate the data that I want back to the drone. So in comparison to existing communication technologies, where the sensor needs to generate its own acoustic signals and that drains its battery, In our technology, the sensor communicates simply by reflecting existing acoustic signals. And so you might be wondering, but what have I done? I've moved the energy consumption from the sensor to the underwater drone. And that would be a correct observation, but that's exactly what I wanted to do. Now I moved all the energy consumption from my underwater sensors, which you can imagine there could be a large number of them, from them to something that has its own energy source, whether it's an underwater drone, or it's a ship, or it's a nearshore access point. Now, of course, all of this is great, but there's still one question, which is how can we control the reflections of underwater acoustic signals? Our idea to control these reflections was to use piezoelectric materials in order to design programmable acoustic reflectors. For those of you who are not familiar, piezoelectric materials can transform mechanical energy into an electrical energy. So let us take an example. Let us say that you have a piezoelectric material, and you try to measure the voltage across this material. And let me say that I have a speaker underwater that transmits sound. Sound travels as a pressure wave. And so when it hits the piezoelectric material, it causes this material to vibrate. And when the material vibrates, you start having an electrical signal across it. So it transforms a mechanical signal, which is sound, into an electric signal, which is voltage. But remember, what I wanted to do is to transform this material into a reflector. And to do that, all we did is that we added a switch across the terminals of the material. When the switch is open, the material acts exactly the same as before, and it transforms mechanical energy into electrical energy. The interesting thing happens when the switch is closed. When the switch is closed, it means that the two terminals of the materials are connected to each other, and when they're connected to each other, it means that you do not have voltage. So you have an incoming signal, you do not have a voltage, so the material cannot vibrate. Where does this energy go if this material cannot vibrate? It has to be reflected back. And now, of course, what I described over here is a simple high-level idea of how our system works in switching between reflective and non-reflective state. In our papers, we discuss in details how we are able to optimize the reflection by optimizing the sonar cross-section of our piezoelectric material using this impedance equation. And we call this technology piezoacoustic backscatter because it uses the piezoelectric effect in order for it to backscatter underwater sound. One of the most important things about this communication technology is that it consumes about 1 million times lower power than state-of-the-art low-power underwater modems. Not only that, also in the absorptive state, the sensor is able to harvest energy, and that allows us to make the entire thing battery-free. So let me show you a video of one of our first experiments, which we ran on MIT's campus in a large experimental pool. So over here, at the far end of the pool, you can see the projector, and you can see the hydrophone receiver. And here's our batteryless sensor, and it is connected to a circuit, and the circuit has an LED. Now remember that our sensor has no battery, and as I play the video, you will see that the LED lights up. The reason the LED lights up is because it is able to harvest enough energy in order for it to be able to light up. Next, let me show you how we're able to communicate data. So I'm going to take the hydrophone that was at the far end of the pool, and I want to show you how we're able to measure the backscatter response at this hydrophone. So over here, I'm plotting the amplitude as a function of time. And this is the normalized amplitude. At about 2.5 seconds, this is the signal that we get. You get a jump, and this is because the speaker starts transmitting. And at about 3 seconds, you start seeing changes between two different amplitudes. And the reason is that the node starts backscattering. And once the node backscatters, you're able to see these changes in the reflection. Now, you might be wondering how come the signal does not go entirely to zero when the node is absorbing. And remember that you're not just getting the signal that comes from the backscatter node. You're also getting the direct signal from the projector, as well as other reflections in the environment. And so building on this basic idea, we developed different algorithms that allow us to scale to many nodes and deal with other reflections in the environment. Let me show you, this is one of the sensors that we built. Actually, it is here in my hand. We fabricated and 3D printed these sensors. One of the questions that I usually get is, in which direction do you reflect the signal back? Do you need to know where the acoustic projector is? And the answer is that you can actually design these to be omnidirectional. So independent of where the source is, you're able to backscatter the signal back to it. Our sensor also harvests energy. It also does bidirectional communication and so on and so forth. The other important thing about this is that this whole thing consumes about $100, and if you're in oceanography, you know that this is low cost is a big thing because you're competing with things that cost thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars, and at the same time, you're able to do this at a much lower power than state-of-the-art nodes. Now, this is the sensor that we built, and if you were to ever fly with this, you will be stuck at TSA security, and they will call the supervisor. This is based on my most recent flight here. So over the past few years, we've been building on this basic technology and expanding it in different ways. So for example, we've been fabricating new types of nodes that bring some of the new ideas from acoustic metamaterials that allow them to operate over a much wider bandwidth so that they can respond to different types of underwater sound. We've also been developing new communication mechanisms to enable things for those of you with communication background, like MIMO, FDMA, medium access control, full duplex, and so on. We've also shown that you could use these nodes for underwater localization. Similar to how Wi-Fi and Bluetooth don't work underwater because they rely on radio signals, GPS also uses radio signals, and so it cannot work underwater. And we've shown how you can use these nodes either to localize them or to use them for underwater navigation. Recently, we've also shown how you can build tiny ML or low-power AI models onto these nodes so that you could do edge inference or edge learning. And most recently, we've also shown how you could build a whole batteryless underwater camera for monitoring the underwater environment using this technology. Now, in the interest of time, I can't go into all of these, but I will just choose a couple of them and show you some of the recent results. So one of the things that we were very excited about is whether we can enable battery-free underwater imaging. And there's many applications for this. If you remember, I said that most marine organisms have never been discovered. So if you can start monitoring underwater environments, you may be able to start discovering new species or understanding the impact of climate change on corals. And so I want to show you a video from the battery-free camera that we built. Over here to the right, you can see our measurement setup. There's an imaging sensor. There's also multicolor active illumination, and there's an underwater object, which is a coral image that we're trying to image. And to the left, you can see the reconstructed image. As I play the video, you'll notice three things. First, you'll notice that we're emitting light, and the reason is because in deep sea environments, you do not have light, and so you need to be able to image. The second thing is you'll see that we're emitting many different colors. And the reason is that the lowest power CMOS imaging sensors that are on the market are monochromatic. And so we figured a way of doing multicolor active illumination that allows us to reconstruct color. The third thing that you've probably noticed is that this image is reconstructed in chunks, and that is because of the memory limitations on the processors that we were using in these environments. I also want to show you a few of the images that we got. This is an image of an African starfish that we took. This is an image of a plastic bottle. So my students went to one of the lakes in New Hampshire, and they captured pollution in the wild. This is a pretty remarkable result over here. What we did is we got seeds of underwater plants, and we planted them, and we monitored their growth over multiple days. So you could see that the plant is growing. And the reason why this result is so important is, going back to where I started, today it's very difficult to do long-term underwater monitoring. You're worried about batteries. Now we're not worried about batteries anymore, and we can allow these to operate over a long time. Another one of our recent results that I wanted to show is, can we enable battery-free underwater AI? So over the past few years, we've seen many advances in tiny ML, where there's been very exciting research on being able to do edge inference and edge learning on very small microprocessors. And so we thought if you could do some of this inference and learning in underwater environments, you can start summarizing the data that you're getting, or maybe doing edge inference and just sending the results. And in collaboration with the researchers at Imperial College, what we did is we took our underwater sensor, we connected it to an underwater hydrophone, and we measured sounds of animals, and we showed that we're able to classify between different types of species. Now, we've shown about 85% accuracy in classifying between a handful of species. But this is only the first step, and it shows the capability of being able to use this technology for even maybe discovering new sounds of animals, or trying to understand how they interact with each other, or even trying to understand their migration patterns. And while all of these results are very exciting, this is really still only the beginning of what we could do with underwater backscatter. So, for example, we've shown that you could reduce the energy consumption by 1 million times. And this is all still using off-the-shelf PCBs, off-the-shelf hardware. If you were to build these into ICs, then you can start building them at the nanowatt power levels. And if you start being at the nanowatt power levels, then maybe you can add a small battery, and that battery will last for many decades. So you don't even care about it being batteryless. You'll still have something that lasts for a very long time because we managed to get it at such a low power. In collaboration with the researchers at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, we've been scaling this technology to kilometer scale distances. So going back to the first figure that I showed you, we were able to, if you remember in the video, it was about a 10-meter off communication distance. Today, we can get about 100 meters, but we've also shown that theoretically, you can get to kilometers or even potentially tens of kilometers of distance. And so now we're translating this research to be able to realize these types of distances, because each new range of distance opens new types of applications. Underwater localization can be used for robotic exploration, and really all of these can enable the various applications that I talked about in marine species, aquaculture, and so on. One of the exciting and challenging things about these projects is that we have to take our nodes and take them to the water in the ocean. Here you can see a couple of my students, Ozvi and Jose, who are running experiments. We've run thousands of experimental trials. And the specific sensor that they're using here is one that has, it's a battery-free node with temperature and pressure measurements. And if you remember, these are important for modeling temperature gradients, which is also important for climate change monitoring. But one of the most exciting applications of this technology extends even beyond our planets. So NASA scientists discovered subsurface oceans in Enceladus, which is Saturn's moon, and Europa, which is Jupiter's moon. And recently, and over there, energy consumption is an even bigger problem. So we've been recently in discussions with them on how we can incorporate these technologies and plan them as part of future space missions to search for life in extraterrestrial oceans. And because of all of these capabilities, this technology was highlighted as an ocean shot for the decade by the US National Academy's Committee on Ocean Sciences. And because we want a lot of people to build on our work, we actually released the code and schematics for all of our projects, including tutorials, because it really goes from the mechanical fabrication to the electronics, to the computing, to the communication, and so on. So I've been talking about oceans, and before I switch to a second part of my talk, where I'm going to be talking a little bit about health, I wanted to see if there's any questions. Otherwise, we can leave the questions until the end of the talk. Go ahead.
So you were talking about the Internet of Things. So to just kind of visualize how this is working, so with the ships and the drones and submarines, would those almost be like satellites kind of are to our internet, where you can't guarantee where they're going to be or that they're going to be communicating with these sensors, but there's going to be enough of them that eventually the sensor will receive a signal from one of them, and that the transmission will go ahead, and then it will be uploaded to some server?
Yeah, but it's a great question. So how do you build the internet out of this? And is it going to be the internet, or is it going to be many networks? And it could be either. And I think a lot of that is going to be determined by how the technology develops. So for example, even if you're getting hundreds of meters, which is something we believe we will be able to achieve soon, then you can start deploying this internet in offshore environments. And in offshore environments, you can have, for example, an access point that is near the shore, and you can have a bunch of sensors that are deployed. Why do you want offshore? Basically a few hundred meters? A, aquaculture. That's where offshore aquaculture is going to be. B is you could be used for disaster response. And C, there's a lot of naval applications there as well. As the distance increases, you can also assume that you have a bunch of sensors that are deployed below the surface. And then you can imagine there's a bunch of floats at the surface. So these floats, for example, have harvest energy from the sun. And then they beam it down. They beam down this energy using acoustics. And then they transmit this information back. So there's different ways of realizing these. Or you could imagine like an ad hoc type of sensor network, which is also another potential way of realizing this. Yes?
Will these devices have any effect on ocean life that uses sound, like whales, or the other way around? Would ocean life that uses sound interfere with these devices?
Yeah, these are great questions, and the answers to them is very different. So the first one is, will it interfere? So there's something called the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which has actually studied the level of power that you're able to transmit in underwater environments. And as long as you're below that power, scientists believe, I mean, we haven't spoken to the animals, but we believe that you're not going to be interfering with their lives. The second question is really interesting because that's actually what motivated the metamaterials work that we did. What we're interested in is can you power up these sensors by harvesting, for example, dolphin or whale sounds, and then backscattering these sounds. And if you're doing that, you don't need the projector altogether. So forget about, like, the Marine Mammal Act stops being, like, you don't need to even abide by it altogether. You're doing that because you're passively backscattering these reflections. Yes?
So I have a question about the signal-to-noise ratio. So I wonder how well the algorithm can distinguish the noise with respect to increasing level of complexity of the environment.
Right. So we've tested these in the Charles River of MIT, which is actually much busier than most ocean environments. And in different ocean environments, like there's different sea states that you can operate with and so on and so forth. From a communication perspective, the more noise you have, you just apply more coding. So your bitrate will go down, but you could still deal with different types of interference or noise environments and operate with them. The flip side is that maybe you can start backscattering this noise. So if the noise reaches a sufficiently high level, you stop having the projector altogether, similar to the answer that I gave for the whale or dolphin sounds, and you use that as your way of powering and communication. Yes?
Yeah, so I want to talk to you about an example case you talked about with the sensors on the seed bed and then the receivers and the transmitters at the surface. If you're talking about like long distance communications, you would actually have to encounter different thermal inclines within the water. So how does that actually affect, one, the signal and the sensor technology, and is that something you can account for?
Right. So the question is about when you start going in like more complex environments, you have different there's the thermocline, different temperatures, and almost the ocean becomes to some extent stratified in ways. There are different ways of dealing with it. One of the things that happens, based on my understanding in these, is that you start having refraction at these. If you're backscattering, it's scattering, so you can emit it in all directions. But you could also use this for your purpose, whereby the thermocline itself almost acts as a waveguide. So you could try to emit, like similar to how fiber optics work, you could try to emit the signal at a specific direction. It's going to travel, and so you stop getting the spherical loss that you usually get, and then it exits at the place that you want it to exit, and maybe you can even steer it. And so these are all very exciting scientific and also technological questions for deployment. And it would be very interesting to see, once we scale it to those size of distances, how we'll be able to leverage the natural sort of boundaries in the ocean. I'll take one more question, and then maybe we'll leave the rest till the end of the talk. Yes?
So I was just sort of curious, like, how are you rendering images without having battery supply or water?
Yeah, so you harvest the energy from sound. You store it in a capacitor for some amount of time. You have a certain level of regulation. When you hit a sufficient voltage, what we do is that we activate the image sensor. The image sensor and we also activate the LED. the image sensor and the LED captures the image, and then you transmit. It uses whatever it can in the memory, and then it transmits it back. And then it does the same thing with another color, and then with another color. And so actually in the video that I showed you, it was sped up by 40 times. It takes about 2 hours to capture every image. This is a paper that came out a couple of weeks ago. But as many of you know, research moves much faster than publication. So now my students are able to do it in about a couple of minutes. They're able to capture these images and transmit them, which is always the exciting thing of working with new technologies. Once you show the first feasibility, there's just so many techniques that you can bring in to scale them and address a lot of real-world challenges. So I'll move on just to make sure that we cover the other parts of my talk. I said that I will be talking about 3 different areas. I will not spend as much time talking about the other 2 areas so that we have enough time at the end to actually answer more questions as well. So going back, we talked about the ocean. A second area that my group works on is decoding the human body. And in this space, we work in two main sort of research directions. Of course, there's a lot of interest in wearables for sensing the human body, but we're interested in the other approaches of doing it, which is how can you sense the human body without any sensor on the body, which is basically contactless sensing. And the second one is how can you sense the human body using sensors that are inside the body, so injectables or implantables. And I want to give you a quick overview of the research that we've been doing in each of these areas, starting with contactless sensing. I've been working in the field of contactless sensing using wireless signals for about a decade now. So I actually want to show you one of the very first prototypes that I built back in 2013, 2014. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to use wireless signals in the environment in order for us to sense people without any sensor on their body. So for example, taking a Wi-Fi or a device like my phone, shining the signal on the wall, and the signal goes through the wall, reflects off things on the other side of the wall, and comes back. And we wanted to use these signals for us to see what is going on the other side of the wall. So I want to show you one of the videos that I made many years ago. This is one of the devices that we built. We put it in another room behind the wall. And in the bottom left, you can see the output screen of the device. Notice the red dot on the screen because it tells you where the device thinks the person is at every point in time. Before I play the video, I just want to say that the spiral on the ground is only there to show you the level of accuracy. Now, as I play the video, you'll see how accurately the device tracks the person without any sensor on their body. This person is me when I was a graduate student. And of course, because it's using reflections, it can also track different limb movements. So for example, over here, my friend Zach, he's pointing at different appliances. And because we can track his hand moving, we can allow him to control appliances just by pointing at them. So for example, he points at the TV to turn it off. And because the device works through walls, even if you leave a room and forget to turn off the light, all you need to do is to point in the direction of that room. And all of this is using a device that is in this adjacent room, so on the other side of the wall. And over the past few years, we've enabled different forms of wireless sensing so that we can get people's locations, gestures, even breathing and heart rate by relying entirely on wireless signals reflected off their body. Our research also led to a startup that came out of my PhD thesis that is currently using this technology to monitor thousands of patients with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and COVID-19. And so basically, they're deploying these sensors in people's homes and monitoring all of their movements across the entire home to be able to monitor disease progression. And the work also had a lot of commercial impact. It's part of the next generation for Wi-Fi. It influenced a number of products that are already on the market. And because of this, a few years ago, we were invited to the White House to demo this research to President Obama. As a faculty, I've been interested in continuing to push these technologies and to always ask the question of what is the finest signal? What is the smallest signal that we are able to sense? And so one of the questions that I was interested in is, can we capture heart recordings, not just the heart rate of a person using wireless signals? So why would we be able to capture heart recordings? Because when your heart beats, it actually creates different vibrations on your body. And we were interested in whether these vibrations can be used to capture entire recordings. One of the challenges is that when you get wireless reflections, when you transmit a wireless signal, you don't just get a reflection from the person's body. You also get reflections from everything in the environment. So what we had to do is come up with these different signal processing techniques that allow us to zoom in on the reflection that comes from the person's heart. So in one of the most recent things that we did is we developed what we call a 4D cardiac beamformer. So it searches in 3D space, and it also searches in the frequency domain in order for it to find the person's heart. And then it locks in on the reflections of the heart, and it is able to then monitor microcardiac events. So you can formalize this using some like n-dimensional Fourier transform, which is really just the math of which shows how it works. And the basic idea is that it allows you to focus on the reflections of the heart. So you transmit a wireless signal, you get its reflections of the heart. And here what I'm showing you is an actual signal that we are able to capture based on these reflections. So we're able to get, for example, different microcardiac events, different valves opening and closing, the mitral valve opening and closing, the aortic valve opening and closing, all by relying on the wireless reflections that are coming from the person's body. Now, I want to show you one of the sample signals that we got from the 4D cardiac beamformer. This is an actual signal that we're able to get after we do the signal processing and the filtering that allow us to focus on the heart reflections. What is really nice about this is you can see actually the main beats of every heartbeat. You can also see different peaks and valleys, which correspond to different heart valves. But when we got this and we compared it to an on-body accelerometer, so we got an accelerometer and we put it on the person's, the apex of their heart, and we tried comparing them to each other. We were very excited because they looked very similar, and so we thought we can actually extract the microcardiac events from them. But it turns out that the correlation between these was less than 0.6. And if you actually try to see, even though these are perfectly time synchronized, the peaks and valleys end up being shifted with respect to each other, even though they're almost in the same region, and even though they're perfectly synchronized. And when we thought more about this, we realized that the reason is that the accelerometer and the RF reflection are capturing the same phenomenon, but in slightly different ways. In the reflection, you're usually measuring distances, but the accelerometer is, for example, the second derivative of the distance. And there's all of these other mechanics that impact a little bit about the translation between them. But it turns out that this is a very nice type of problem for data-driven models, where you can build a data-driven model that takes pairs of signals, and it is able to learn the filter that translates one of them into the other. So you model this as a signal processing filter, an FIR filter that you want to try to extract, and you could simply try to learn it based on data pairs from an accelerometer that you put on the body and the sensor that is capturing things wirelessly. And this is only, of course, you're doing it in the training. At test time, you don't need the accelerometer altogether, and you can still capture the person's heart reflections. And then once we were able to capture these, we were also extending them to capture 5 different microcardiac events, which correspond to different heart valves. So we evaluated this on in everyday environments. So we put our sensors, for example, near someone's desk, near their bed, near their couch, and we monitored people for over about 100,000 heartbeats. And our results showed that for across each of these, we're able to achieve about 98 to 99% accuracy in timing each of these microcardiac events with respect to sort of how much shift you're getting on the SCG. More recently, what we've been also interested in is how can you capture something like this when someone is not sitting down somewhere? How do you make this even more robust to different types of movements in the environments? And we've developed motion-robust algorithms that allow us to not only extract, maintain this level of accuracy with timing microcardiac events, but also build on top of it and build models that are able to sense human stress levels. And the reason we're able to get people's stress levels is once you can get heartbeats and breathing patterns, research in the affective computing community has shown that you could use these in order for you to track people's stress levels or even emotions. And so we built on that research, and for the first time, we showed that using wireless reflections, you're able to track people's stress levels. Looking forward, there's many still open and exciting applications over here. So for example, we're working with medical doctors at Mass General to start using our sensors for cardiovascular monitoring. We're also interested in building a richer and more accurate what is called seismocardiogram, which is a recording of the mechanical movements of the heart. So for example, I showed that you can get 5 microcardiac events, but doctors have shown that using on-body accelerometers, you might be able to get up to 11. So how can we refine our algorithms to be able to extract those as well? And now that we're able to monitor stress, the next step for us would be, can you move from physiological to mental health monitoring? So you can have these sensors that are monitoring our mental health over a long period of time. And maybe if we're approaching burnout, tell us, OK, maybe it's time for you to take a break, even if what you want is to optimize your productivity. The second area that we've been working on beyond contactless sensing, please go ahead. Yeah.
Question on that.
Yeah.
If I wanted to prevent you from surreptitiously monitoring my stress and mental health, what would I wear?
This is a great question. How do you protect against a technology that has a lot of good applications, but it's also so invasive? So there's actually a paper that came out this year that shows exactly how you could do that, which is you can put a counter sensor that creates fake or ghost reflections, and it confuses a large number of ghosts, and it confuses the person who is trying to monitor you so that they cannot really tell what is going on, especially if you're on the other side of the wall. But I think the privacy question is bigger than technology. And with any new technology, there is always major risks, and there's also policy that needs to be taken into account. And so one of the things that we've done is we've also spoken to policymakers about how you put in the right measures in place so that they're not playing catch up as they often do, and they prevent their use in environments where they should not be used. I want to move on to talking also about some of our research on sensing the human body from the inside using batteryless microimplants. And one of the reasons we were motivated to start doing this is we were sensing the human body from the outside, and we were excited, OK, can you now sense the human body from the inside, even if you were to put microimplants? A few years ago, this was actually live at the World Mobile Show in Barcelona. A man received an under-chip implant live there. For some of you might be familiar, basically what they put is an RFID right under their skin. And the only thing that they could use this for is for access control. So rather than tapping my card, they would just tap themselves in and out. I don't know why anybody would do that, but it turns out this person wanted to. So someone else wrote in an op-ed article, my implant is both less scary and less useful than you might think, which makes sense if the only thing that you're using it for is access control in and out. But if you can take batteryless microimplants and put them deep inside the human body, then they open up many different applications. So over the past few years, we've been trying to take microimplants like these, which have no batteries, and we want to be able to put them inside the body for long-term monitoring. So how can we monitor inside the body when they have no batteries? The idea is to use wireless power. So you transmit a wireless signal, which goes through the human body. It attenuates, it powers up the microimplant, and it is able to sense data and communicate it to the outside world. And the reason we wanted to do this is because it enables many different applications. So for example, you can imagine a network of sensors inside the body that is continuously monitoring biomarkers and tumors. For example, it's monitoring the gut microbiome. Or, for example, if I am traveling somewhere, I can take a pill that expands inside my body. And if I'm exposed to COVID, it can tell me immediately to self-isolate. Another application is in long-term drug delivery systems. Today, most of the time when you take a pill, you envision that it immediately releases the drug into the body. But there's many applications where you might want to release the drug over an extended period of time. And we've actually started seeing some of these smart pills already on the market, which can deliver drugs over an extended period of time. But the existing ones all have a battery, which takes up a significant chunk of their size. And so if you can make them batteryless, then you can, for example, send them a trigger whenever they need to release the drug, or even monitor whether the drug has been released. And there's many other applications for wireless and batteryless microimplants, which is what led us to developing technologies that can remotely power and communicate with deep tissue, batteryless, and wireless microimplants. One of the main challenges that we face is that the human body really attenuates RF signals a lot. So for example, if you were to take a device outside the body and send the signal from a distance, by the time it hits the body, it will be attenuated. And as it goes through the body, it will be attenuated a lot. Signals decay inside the body about 1,000 times, if not more, faster than they would decay in air. And this also impacts the harvesting efficiency of the existing sensors, which is why today you cannot power up batteryless sensors from a distance outside the body. You either need to put, for example, something that someone needs to wear on the body in order for it to power them, or you could do it at superficial depth, and you can do it from a distance. And so we've been thinking about how we can power and communicate with deep tissue sensors despite the attenuation and tissue complexity. And for that, we've been developing two types of solutions. The first type of solution are new beam focusing technologies. And what these allow us to do is, independent of where the sensor is inside the body, you're able to overcome the fact that you're operating under what is called line channel conditions and still delivering sufficient power while remaining at safe levels. And the second thing that we've been doing is we've been building these microimplants that can reprogram themselves inside the body. Because even after we build these beam focusing technologies, what we realize is that sometimes you take the exact same implant, you put it at the same depth, but somewhere slightly different inside the body, and you're not able to power it up. And it turns out that the implant starts interacting with the tissues that are around it, and so it needs to reconfigure itself depending on where it is. Now, I don't have time to go into a lot of details, but I want to show you one of the implants that we built. This is the microchip, so we built the stuff into the IC. We also built it on a programmable antenna and flexible substrate. And the reason why we wanted to do that is so that you can laminate it on organs, or you could, for example, roll it into a pill form if someone wants to swallow it. And we built a full SoC on this, so it can harvest energy, it can do some computing, there's some logic, it can reprogram its antenna, it can do bitrate adaptation, and actually the later die, which came out this year, can also do sensing and security, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And we've done experimental evaluation with our collaborators medical doctors at Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard Medical School, both in vitro and in vivo. We've run hundreds of experimental trials in different tissues. So for example, here you can see some of the tissues. You can see the progression with which we work. And we also tested it inside living animals in different locations inside swine. And what we've shown is that we can adapt to all types of tissues that we've tested with, because we're able to reconfigure the sensor for up to 200 megahertz of bandwidth. We're able to also achieve fairly high throughputs, which allows you to transmit a lot of data if need be. But we're also able to scale it down in the power consumption if you're operating in an area, for example, where you're not able to harvest amount of power. But the most important thing that we showed is that you can allow these to operate at depth of, for example, 15 centimeters inside tissues. The same sensor which, without our technologies, would have otherwise operated at only superficial depth. And with that, we demonstrated the ability to power up in deep tissues from a distance outside the body. And this really opens up a new type of applications for batteryless implants. For example, you can imagine an access point that is near someone's bed, that when they go to bed, it recharges these implants, it collects data without them having to wear, for example, bulky vests on their bodies, or so on. And there's also so many ways to take this technology moving forward. So we've shown how you can power and communicate. We're currently working on how you can also do sensing and communicate the sense data, how you can take this to do some level of actuation with drug dosing. But of course, once you start being able to get data from inside the body, it opens up new questions on the security and the privacy of our health data that is coming from inside our body. And so recently, we also showed how you can incorporate security engines into these batteryless implants so that they can both authenticate whoever is trying to access them, and they can encrypt the data that is being transmitted so that only the trusted sensor, a trusted sender or a trusted receiver can decode it. And so with this, I've also told you about our research in the human body. I'll hold the questions until the end because I got my 10-minute mark. So I don't need more than 10 minutes to talk about the third area that we've been working on, which is in the context of robotics and automation. And then I will make sure to open it up to questions at the end. So the third area that we've been working on is wireless and sensor technologies to decode hidden worlds using robotics. And the reason we were motivated by this is that over the past few years, we've seen amazing advances in robotics with computer vision. So researchers have shown how you can build these amazing computer vision models that allow robots to understand the world almost to the way we see it and the way we understand it. But we've been interested in whether you can enable robots to see things that we cannot see. For example, if you give a robot a set of boxes, can it know what is inside a closed box? Or can it know whether the food or medicine inside a bottle is safe? Or if you give it a pile of items, can it go and fetch items that I, as a human, cannot see, but it is able to see it, using its sensors? And the way we've been able to answer all of these questions is by augmenting robots with wireless perception. As is probably clear by now, radio frequency signals can traverse occlusions. They can also traverse clutters. And so because they can go through occlusions and clutter, they allow you to extend the robot perception beyond line of sight. And we've been building different robotic systems that leverage this perception in order to enable new manipulation tasks. So let me show you one of the systems that we built. Over here, what we did is we mounted radio frequency antennas on the robotic gripper. And the robot is trying to find and retrieve a key that is hidden under the pile. The robot also has a camera on its wrist, but the camera's line of sight is locked to the item because it's under occlusion. So if you try to look from the field of view, you're not able to see it. But using our sensor, it is able to locate the item, and then it is able to pick it up. And we've also tested this in different environments. So over here, the robot is trying to search for a remote control that is hidden under this pile of clothes. So it is able to use a combination of computer vision and RF in order for it to understand the environment and manipulate it, and then here pick up the remote control and hand it over to my student, Tara, so that she can watch her favorite TV show in the lab. So how does this work? The way it works is that we rely on batteryless RFID stickers. I'm sure many of you are familiar with RFIDs. They're 3-cent stickers. They're attached to many different items. Odds are, on average, each of you is probably wearing 2 or 3 on their bodies today. And so we tag the items of interest with stickers, or they're already tagged. You transmit a wireless signal, and you measure the response of the RFID. And what we did is that using the response of the RFID that we got, we developed a method that allows us to measure the time of flight to the batteryless RFID. And so we were able to measure the time it takes the signal to go to the tag and back. And once you measure time, you can use it in order for you to get distance by simply multiplying it by the speed of propagation. So knowing the time, you're able to measure the distance. Once you know the distance, you know that it is on a sphere, the item is on a sphere that is centered at the antenna. And then we go ahead and we also combine this with computer vision, and that allows us to narrow in the areas within which the tagged item could be. And then you move around, collect more and more measurements. You have a confidence of where the item is. You go ahead, and now you use computer vision-based algorithms in order for you to remove whatever is on top of it, move them to the side, and then now you're able to see the item, and you're able to pick it up. And then you verify once you've picked it up one last time, so that you know that you have picked up the right item, which actually is a difficult problem in robotics today. It's called singulation. How do I know that I've picked up the right item once I have picked it up? And I didn't go into a lot of details, but in order for us to do this, what we developed is this RF visual reinforcement learning network that combines RF and vision to minimize the number of measurements that it needs to do so that it can efficiently retrieve the items. Now, of course, one of the most recent questions that we're interested in is, what if the target item is untagged? What if you have an untagged item that is in this pile? Would the mere presence of an RFID tagged item allow me to still recover and find the tagged item? And so for that, what we've done is that we built a probabilistic sensor fusion approach to reason about the environment. So let me say that I'm looking at a pile, and I know that there is some RFID tagged items in the pile, but I don't know what other items there are, and I'm trying to search for another item. If I can locate the RFID tagged item and I have some model of how it looks like, then I can reason that most likely the other item that I'm searching for is not exactly at that location. It might be around it, and I can start probabilistically fusing this information together. So over here, you could see that as, for example, the camera moves, it is able to improve its uncertainty or reduce its uncertainty of where the untagged item is. So for example, here's a video of, there's a target item. You could see it's this pink, it's a turtle, that is not visible to the camera, and it is also untagged. And there's a bunch of other tagged items in the environment. You can actually see the RFIDs on them. And so using both computer vision and the RF, it is able to reason about where the item is, go ahead and remove what is on top of it. Once it removes what is on top of it, it goes back, and now it is able to see the item. For example, it knows that it is looking for this red turtle, and then it is able to pick it up. And once it picks it up, it's also detects that and can hand it over to my student, Laura. And what we've shown is that this approach outperforms vision-only baseline by more than 2 times. It means it's 2 times faster. And this is the mere presence of other RFID tagged items in the pile. They allow you to reason about the pile by combining it with computer vision. Moving ahead, there's many applications. If you imagine that items, RFIDs still keep getting cheaper, then you can imagine in a grocery environment, they're going to be tagged. You can enable automated fulfillment in manufacturing environments. And one of the other applications is in warehouses, where you're able to have these robots that can identify items and enclose boxes. This technology was named as one of the top AI trends to watch by Wall Street Journal. Also, MIT named it this year as one of the 100 ways MIT is making the world better. And recently, with one of my students, I co-founded a startup to commercialize this research in retail automation. And so with this, I've told you about our research on wireless and sensor technologies to decode hidden worlds in the ocean, in the human body, for robotics. Of course, none of this work would have been possible without my amazing group of students and postdocs. You can see here, each of them is holding a different type of a sensor that either they built or they are working with. And we love thinking ourselves and with our collaborators about what types of new hidden worlds we want to be able to explore, and how can we build technologies for us to be able to explore them. And with this, I will wrap up my talk. Thank you very much for listening, and happy to take any questions.
We have time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience. Yeah.
So earlier when you were talking about the contactless sensing under, I believe it was underwater, what sort of safeguards do you, oh no, that was in the human body. So what safeguards do you have to not pick up other signals? For example, the accelerometer, when you were measuring the heart rate setting.
So how do you not pick up the accelerometer's data? You only do the training with the accelerometer. Actually, when you're doing the testing, you're not doing it. Oh, you're saying what if there's some type of interference?
Yeah, like other interference or something else that might be present in the room or something. isn't that precise that it only focuses?
You actually pick it up. You pick up all those reflections, and you zoom in on the location of the person and on their heartbeat. And if there's multiple people, you'll actually monitor all of their heartbeats at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, the untagged items. Was it supposed to purposely find the pink turtle, or so you?
Yeah. So it knows what it's looking for. It has a model of what it is looking for, but it does not know where it is. Yeah. So it knows that it was looking for the pink turtle in that example. If you could make it, I don't know, a blue turtle, it will also look for the blue turtle.
Unfortunately, there's no more time for questions, although you can come down and ask him afterwards, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks.